Skills of War ended on Monday. Skills of War. It's been 6 days, I guess, but it kind of feels like 2 or 3 weeks have passed. It's been a pretty crazy week. I certainly would have recorded this sooner, but there was just too much to do. Fortunately, the campaign and the end of the campaign were poignant enough that they are heavily on my mind. So it's definitely an experience I wanted to kind of sort out. So I figured I would stream it and then have the recording if I ever need to go back to it, or if anybody ever asked me what my thoughts are on running a campaign 1 to 20. So I guess before I begin, if anybody doesn't know, online I go by the handle of Crashgem. I run a lot of Dungeons & Dragons games, primarily 5th edition. Currently running 5 campaigns with a bunch of one-shots on the side. It's been quite an experience. I've been playing D&D since I was like 12 or 13 years old, so we're going on like 26 years now. I love it. It's the best thing in the whole world. I was at a point in my life where I needed a part-time job, so I thought maybe I would, deliver pizzas or some other kind of throwaway part-time job to kind of help me get some extra money to take care of some, student loans or whatever. And I saw online that there were people that were running Dungeons & Dragons games, like for money, which seemed kind of crazy to me. And I ended up playing in one, and just to kind of get a feel for what it was like. And as I did, I thought to myself, I think I could do this. So I'm a big fan of Matt Colville, and he's a YouTuber, talks about Dungeons & Dragons a lot. Probably heard of him. One of the videos he made talked about the Red Hand of Doom, and I had never heard of it. Somehow I had missed it. It had flown completely under my radar. It was an adventure path that came out right at the end of 3.5, right before Paizo sort of stole the show, and D&D sort of started to fade into the background and changed hands and ownership over and over and over again. So it was sort of the swan song of 3.5 edition, and there were things happening in the adventure that sort of hinted at things that had yet to come. In a way, it almost sort of foreshadowed 4th edition to a certain extent. But as he talked about it in the video, I was completely enamored with the idea of it, because it was very much just like an action hero campaign. It was a few against many impossible odds. That was the reoccurring theme. There's a few heroes who have to save this backwater, middle of the nowhere valley against essentially an oncoming army. And in classic over-the-top Dungeons & Dragons plot lines, it starts very simple, and it escalates to the point where gods themselves are getting involved, and it's craziness. The original adventure was, like I said, 3.5, so it was written with it was written with that kind of rule set in mind. So lots of splat books, lots of templates and prestige classes and add-ons, that sort of thing. The adventure itself started at level 5, which was kind of unusual, and then it rolled up into, I believe, level 12 or so, culminating in a final battle against a super powerful half-dragon cleric of Tiamat, and then more than likely a battle against the aspect of Tiamat. So an aspect being like a mini boss version of that deity. So I have to say I was excited for it. But I did my research, and from what I understood, it was hard for people to feel invested in protecting the world if they just showed up at level 5. And level 5 is definitely the power level of 5th edition. So I kind of liked the idea of starting the campaign at level 1 with people who were native to Elservale, have them doing essentially odd jobs, low-level odd jobs in Elservale, and then becoming more invested in the setting. So when the actual campaign started, when the Red Hand of Doom arrived with its army of giants and hobgoblins and goblins and started destroying everything, they were 4 or 5 levels invested into this place and protecting it. But all of that basically added up to me deciding that, yeah, I definitely wanted to run this, and I was going to try to run it as a paid game. And part of why I decided to do it was I wanted to offer a game that nobody else was running. So that's where I ended up. Couple problems there. One, it's nobody else was running it because there was no Roll20 materials for it. So there was no way to just hop on to the store and Roll20, drop $50, and have all the maps already loaded up and already dynamically lit and all the monster tokens set up. Everything had to be done from scratch. Everything had to be done from scratch. There was a lot going on in this campaign, and it was a lot of work to convert it over. But I guess maybe fueled by imposter syndrome, I felt like I really needed to blow whatever people were crazy enough to pay me to DM for them. I needed to blow their minds. I needed to blow it out of the water. So I went hard, getting maps and making custom miniatures and trying to find cool music and just doing everything I could to make it just this really unique and special high production, I guess, Roll20 experience. And ultimately I was pretty happy with my results. So I got a group together, and we had our session 0, and the session 0 took place, everybody met up in the town of Drellin's Ferry, which I think has been archived into this 138 pages of archive stuff. Oh yeah, it's crazy. You can see all these different Drellin's Ferry maps. I basically overcompensated. I made every part of Drellin's Ferry into a Roll20 map just in case, which is kind of crazy. Let's see. We'll restore Drellin's Ferry and take a peek at it, because that's where it all started. It all started over at Drellin's Ferry. So, Drellin's Ferry, this map was ripped right out of the Adventure PDF, which, if you're interested, Red Hand of Doom can be picked up, I believe, on Drive-Thru RPG, DM's Guild, one of those two, for a pretty fair price and very good quality. So, yeah, Elservale has the Elser River, and then you start in the little town of Drellin's Ferry. So here we had Drellin's Ferry, where it all started, and I had a quest board, and the quest board was like straight out of The Witcher, and they could choose any intro quest that they wanted to choose, and that would kind of get the ball rolling on things. So the first quest that they decided to do as a group was they were going to work for this cat right here, Brother Denny, and they were going to go to an ancient graveyard about an hour or two outside of town, and they were going to investigate rumors that there were undead living in the graveyard. So they did. They went to the graveyard, and they fought ghouls as level 1 characters, and we were playing with extreme critical hits, and I think the first monster attack of the campaign setting the tone for the entire campaign, was a critical hit against the party's fighter, and I think it dropped him to like 0 in one hit, and everybody kind of like that set the pace, I think, for like the rest of the campaign. Yeah, so it was pretty crazy after that. So yeah, so that kind of set the pace, and then they investigated that. They came back to town. They got paid. They interacted with the people of the town. I tried really hard to immerse them into the town itself. And the pacing in the very beginning was very much like any campaign, just early campaign. You're experiencing, the very beginning of your adventuring career. You're fighting super basic stuff. Everything's cool. So there was an option to fight like a river troll. There were rumors of a hydra. There was quests to collect rare herbs. There was secretly a serial killer living in the town that was killing people that they could have investigated that. I mean, could have been anybody. I don't know. I mean, I don't know who it was. But they didn't pursue any of those. They actually went looking for a missing boy. And turns out that the whole plot line of that was the mother was in love with the father, but the father didn't love her back, so she made a deal with the fairies of the Witchwood to win the dude's heart. But the classic, like, we're going to take your firstborn situation came into play, so on and so forth. So the party is going to go ahead and investigate that and try to figure out what happens. That was pretty fun, because they did end up going to the Feywild at only like level 2 or 3, which, yeah, also kind of crazy. I think the I think that also kind of set the tone a lot for the campaign, was just them doing stuff that was probably harder than it should have been, or harder than they should have been allowed to do, but ultimately it was a lot of fun. Let's see. I had this really cool map for the Fey Woods that I cobbled together. Because again, I wanted everything they did, I wanted it to kind of like blow their minds. Like, I wanted them to go there and be like, holy crap, this is amazing. Now here we go. So yeah, they're like level 3, 2 or 3, and they're rolling up onto this like spooktacular like Feywild map after fighting off like a displacer beast to get access to like a fairy circle to come over here. They're making their way through. The dynamic lighting's looking great. The map's looking great. They're fighting tough monsters, stuff popping out of the river, fighting crazy plants and stuff like that. Here they are, little babies. Their miniature's still there after all this time. There's Jericho and Dekron, good old Riddles, Eridon, and Saris. Yeah, Saris was only with us for a little bit in the beginning. Ultimately, just didn't fit well with the other players in the group. Decided to find a game elsewhere. But it all worked out in the end. Overall, player attrition for this campaign, considering it ran like 18 months or something crazy like that, I think in the end, we lost 3 players. That was it. Which, as far as D&D games go, I mean, that's pretty damn good, if you ask me. And like two of the people that we lost, it was for work reasons. So it's not like they wanted to go. It was very much Mr. Stark, I don't want to go situation when they left. Anyways, but yeah, they did this. Then they came back and they wanted to hunt down the Queen of Thorns, who was the local bandit lord, and that was sort of their. I want to say that was sort of their last hurrah before they became embroiled in the events of the bigger, badder campaign at large. And let me see. For that one, there was a lot of work they did in the forest. That's also what triggered the beginning of the most ridiculous rewrite of all time, which was the Dwarves, which I'm going to talk about because, yeah. The party on their way to the Bandit's Hideout. Bandit Hideout, here we go. And I guess we'll bring up the outpost also. Yeah, so they're looking for the bandits. They find this outpost in the middle of the woods, and there are these dwarves here. You can see them hidden on the GM's lair right here. Just a family of dwarfs, you know, little dwarf kid, dwarf mom, dwarf dad, right? So they were merchants. They were taken on the road by the bandits. They were probably going to be sold into slavery to the Red Hand because the bandits were in league with the Red Hand. And the party went full murder hobo on these dwarfs. They basically set them loose, naked in the woods, and were like, "We've got work to do. We can't escort you back to town, and we're taking all your stuff." So, sometimes it'd be like that. The dwarves looked to Rurik, who was the party dwarf, token dwarf, I guess, and they pleaded with him, and he was like, "It is what it is." And so they were kind of set loose in the woods. So these dwarves, the kid died. They got jumped by wolves. Wolves killed the kid. When the parents got back to town, they told people what had happened. Very badly hurt the reputation of the order. Very badly hurt the reputation of Rurik. And then kind of, bringing consequences into play, these two parents then traveled to the Hammer Fist Holds to the south, which is the Dwarven Kingdom of this Elster Vale setting, and basically laid their, complaint before the king. And the reason I did that is that the king, as written in the adventure, did really not want to get himself or his kingdom involved in the fight against the Red Hand. Like, it would require a lot of diplomacy and or bribery to get him to leverage his army against the Red Hand. So they were sort of a neutral party to begin with. And I thought this would be an interesting thing to have added to that already difficult situation. Ultimately, I think the guilt, of what transpired kind of pushed Rurik way into the chaotic neutral zone, because he became more and more convinced that the reason the dwarves didn't want to help had nothing to do with him and his decisions. It completely had to do with the dwarves being bad guys, which this whole thing went down and rewrites happened, and that was exciting. Back over here, they continued their journey. They did some interrogations. They eventually found the hideout of these bandits. There's a beautiful upstairs area that they had to fight in, and then they eventually fought their way downstairs. The downstairs, it's just the same bandit hideout from Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's like the exact same map. Just a real high-quality map that floats around the internet for people to use. I wish I knew off the top of my head the name of the creator, because it's fantastic. And, of course, I added ridiculous stuff to it. So they had to fight, like the basilisk from Harry Potter. And it turned people to stone, and it was crazy. There was a prison area where other people who were captured by the bandits were being sold into slavery. There was this big old troll, and the troll was like the prison guard kind of thing. And then there was also the Queen of Thorns herself over here, who was also the same woman that killed resident edgelord Eridon's parents. So, knowing that she was there, but also knowing that there's prisoners, the low-level party split up, and I ran this entire dungeon in essentially like 2 parts. So there was half a group was over here, and half a group was over here. They never really made it into the deeper parts of the dungeon either. because they were just kind of focusing on their goals and then getting the hell out of here. Ultimately, though, the Queen of Thorns escaped. They did kill the troll, but it was a hard fight. It was a hard fight. And it was, I think, the first real hard fight of the campaign that they were just like, this is crazy. And again, sort of like the ghouls getting that critical hit in the very beginning, it continued to set that expectation of what the hell have we gotten ourselves into. But yeah, so this sort of marked like their graduation from low levels to high levels. From here on out, the actual formal campaign started up. So everything up until this point was just homebrew stuff that I had prepared to sort of give them low-level experiences and level them up to 5. So back on the big map, on the regional map, right, of the area. This is the OG regional map, not the super high-quality one that somebody made and we got to use for the second half of the campaign. They returned to Drellin's Ferry. Rumors of hobgoblins and goblins in the area starting to make people nervous. But there was still a celebration of their victory over the bandits and a celebration of the prosperity of the area. A perfect setup for a bunch of bad stuff coming to pass. So they sort of had one last hurrah where they got to be sort of local celebrities, and they participated in like games of skill and chance at a big festival. And some of that was somewhat sullied by the events of the campaign, but overall, it was a good time. And that's when the other shoe dropped and the campaign started. So they hit level 5. And they were feeling like absolute champions. They headed out into the woods to investigate goblin activity, and they wound up getting ambushed along the road by hobgoblins, which is the first scripted adventure of the actual written campaign. And it was basically a TPK. So yeah, campaign over. There you go. Right away. Sometimes rolling your dice on the table is not the best idea. No. Yeah, so they got a TPK because hobgoblins don't mess around. And fortunately, hobgoblins are lawful evil, and the campaign as written was like, some of these encounters are very hard. If the party ever gets a TPK, take them prisoner instead. And here's what happens if they're taken prisoners. So the writers actually knew that this was going to happen at some point, or at least they suspected, which I think, I don't want to say lazy writing, but it kind of gave them like a pass on making things like hard, because they were like, well, they'll just take them prisoner. So they ended up prisoners, which, like DM tip, not every group can handle being prisoners very well. So there was definitely some hurt feels about being taken prisoner. What we did to handle it is everyone had a week from being taken prisoner before the next session that they could make secondary characters. And these characters would basically be hired by the town of El Surveil to rescue the OG party from the hobgoblins who were keeping them at Wrathkeep. Because I think one of the party members escaped, and he went back to town and told everybody what happened and where they were taken. And they had that all set up. So Wrathkeep was a pretty significant set piece for the published adventure. So half the party was basically running, temp characters that they were using to rescue themselves. And so we had a very cool infiltration type mission. The party split up into 2 teams. The stealthy party was going to go in and save everybody, while the beefy guys were going to wait outside for the signal and then basically just storm the main gates of this ancient fortress. And ultimately, it was a really cool session. And they were able to save everybody, and they were able to get free. And then I think one of the first like real kind of baller moves of the campaign happened. There was a Goliath who from Red Rock who worked out of Brindle for the Lions of Brindle, and he had come along, and he and this Minotaur that worked for the Red Hand, they were like squaring off like mano a mano at the edge of this cliff. And they basically like they were down to like fumes, and the Minotaur was charging him at the edge of the cliff with the intention of shoving him off the cliff. And he was just like, is there any way that I could grab him and throw him off the cliff instead? And I was like, of course, we're just going to do opposed attack rolls, and whoever gets the highest attack roll wins. And of course, RNGesus shows up, and the player rolled like a nat 20, and the Minotaur rolled like a nat 1, and he got to just basically just pick up this Minotaur who had growth cast on him, so he was like a huge creature, and just throw him off the cliff. And it was kind of like the first like holy shit of the whole campaign. So yeah, fond memories of that battle. Let's see, do we have Wrathkeep still, or did it get deleted? There it is. Okay. Yeah, so Wrathkeep was this boyo right here. Yeah. Some inconsistencies, obviously, in map quality at the beginning, but it was still a nice map. So they had this whole fight going on over here at the main gates. That's the Minotaur who got knocked off the or got thrown off the cliff. There he is. And yeah, there was this dungeon area down here. They had to go down. Oh wait, where's the dungeon area? Oh, dungeon area was down here. They had to go save people. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on at Wrathkeep. Also at Wrathkeep, there was a vault, and down in the vault was the first OP magic item of the campaign. Yeah, so the first OP magic item of the campaign was the Quarterstaff of Continuation. And basically, it was a like staff of life, or a staff of healing, staff of restoration, something like that from 3.5. It could just cast Raise Dead. Like, you know, just all the time, it felt like. Just all the damn time. Which the writers even said, this is a really strong item. Why would we have such a strong item in this campaign? Because the campaign is kind of unbalanced and crazy. So we want to make sure that your party is able to keep going no matter what happens to them. Which felt like yet another sort of like absolution, right, of responsibility, where they were like, well, you know, you'll get taken prisoner, and or you'll bring yourself back to life with this magic staff. So everything's cool, man. And again, that was just sort of the flavor of this campaign. But you can kind of notice a pattern where it's kind of ramping up to be more and more and more bananas. So another thing that they noticed while they were here in Wrathkeep was battle plans. And honest to God, this was probably the kiss of death for the pacing of this campaign, was the battle plans. Gosh, yeah. So, the first Wormlord, those are basically the generals of the Red Hand, that they encountered was Koth. And Koth worked out of here. That's a cutie right here, Koth. And Koth had a map. And the map had dates and locations on it, which admittedly makes sense because, you know, this is a war campaign. They need plans. So it basically detailed, like, this is where we're going to be on this day, and we're going to attack, and then these many days later, we're going to attack here. And it was cute because, you know, oh, he's a bugbear. They're hobgoblins. You know, they have funny handwriting and they talk funny or whatever. So, yeah. But anytime something is in writing, right, it's like very hard to finesse it afterwards. So, like, once this map is in the possession of the players, and the players basically have the Google Calendar of like the campaign, it changes everything. The same thing can happen in other games with a built-in timer. Like, I think a major complaint a lot of people have about Tomb of Annihilation as a campaign is that there's a time limit on the campaign. So once the players realize there's a time limit, they get hung up on that time limit, and it becomes the obsession of some of the players is they have to beat the clock. And depending on your DM style, you might really ramp up the importance of beating the clock because, you know, that's the whole theme of the adventure. People that have run Tomb of Annihilation that said like, oh, it was great, we had a lot of fun, I asked them how they felt about the time limit, and they said, we just ignored it. Yeah, people that had trouble with Tomb of Annihilation, I asked them what gave them trouble. It's always the time limit. The time limit gave them trouble. I will say that the introduction of this map and this time limit, it definitely changed the feeling of the game. There were, from this moment on, there were less and less roleplay sessions. There were barely any downtime activities. It was always move. Time is of the essence. We've got to do this. We don't have much time. Which is exactly how the adventure was written and exactly how they wanted it to play out. But it definitely, this little map right here sort of turned the timer on and changed everything. So that's worth mentioning. All right, so they go back to town. They explain, hey, there's an actual real army. This isn't just a small tribe of goblinoids. Like, there's this big army called the Red Hand. They're marching on Elservale. They're coming from the Western Wastes. We need to do something. It's eventually decided that they should blow up the bridge, which you'll notice on this map. There's a place called Skull Gorge Bridge right around here. They have to go blow that bridge up. Well, who doesn't want to blow up a bridge? So, yeah, they had to go blow up this bridge. And for the bridge, I really lucked out. Somebody online took like these top-down screens from like Witcher 3, and I took said screens and I photoshopped them into like a huge-ass bridge because the map that they gave me for like the bridge was super-duper lame. So I made like this really cool bridge. Let's see. Skull Bridge in here still. I might have to grab it from an earlier version. Yeah, hold on. I'll transmog it over. Yeah, while I'm transmogging it over, yeah. So this battle actually ended up being probably one of the cooler things that happened, I want to say, in the entire campaign from like 1 to 20. It was fantastic, and it's definitely something worth talking about. So let me go back in time to an earlier Red Hand of Doom save. Oh, by the way, if you're running a long campaign, every couple months you should totally clone your server, just in case, because it would be a shame to lose all of your assets if something happened to your Roll20 server. Maybe it's Stone Bridge instead of Skull Bridge. Let's see. It's been such a long time, it's hard to remember. Yeah, there we go. Skull Gorge Bridge. So let's take a moment, right? Beautiful. Look at that thing. It's lovely. So, as per the adventure, one side of the river, or the gorge, excuse me, had just, I mean, for lack of a better term, an assload of bad guys on it. Essentially, an entire army was on that side of the bridge. And then this was the other side of the bridge where the party showed up. They had been given by the gnomes of the Gnome Nation, because, I mean, not everybody can have a great name, I guess. They had been given some blast powder to blow up the bridge, because why not? So they had these explosives they were going to use to blow up the bridge. and they rolled up on it, and they had to deal with basically hellhounds, hunting drakes, because I reskinned hellhounds into hunting drakes to kind of go with a more dragony theme, because they work for Tiamat. So they had these hunting drakes, which were just reskinned hellhounds, and hobgoblins, and there were little goblins everywhere causing problems, and then there was the first dragon of the campaign. So the first dragon of the campaign, they had to face out in the open on this bridge that has like a 175-foot drop down to the river below, and an entire army backing it up. Here he is over here. Ozyrandian, a.k.a. Ozzy. Yeah. So 3.5 had feats for dragons. It had, I think, prestige classes for dragons. It had all kinds of cool stuff, custom stuff for dragons. So all of the dragons in the OG published adventure were awesome. I wanted to make sure that flavor carried over, because 5th edition's great, but 5th edition dragons are absolutely the most boring thing in the entire world. So, Ozyrandian, what could this cat do? Oh my gosh. So let's bring up his character sheet. Is it linked still? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Oh, there it goes. There's like thousands of assets in this campaign now, so it runs a little slow. But let's see if it ever pulls up. Yes, no, maybe. Or you could just crash. That'd be cool too. Essentially, the number one thing I wanted for Ozyrandian was I wanted lingering poison breath, which he has. So you can see here, this guy is pretty nuts for, I think they were 6th level at this point, 6th level party. So, dude has great flight speed, good swim speed, has a lot of HP, he's got a really nice armor class, all sorts of stuff. This villainous alacrity, I did not use, but essentially he could have gone twice per round. I opted instead to just give him legendary actions, even though he technically wasn't an adult dragon yet. I also scaled him up a bit, because there's nothing more embarrassing than a medium-sized dragon. Yeah. As it is, like, a large dragon's kind of embarrassing in and of itself. But his real thing was this lingering breath. So he flew over the party, he dropped this lingering breath down, and they just didn't even know what to do. You know what I'm saying? Because they were just like, breath weapon that does something besides breath weapon? That's crazy. And essentially his lingering breath would leave behind a, like, cloud kill, a stinking cloud kind of thing behind it. So ongoing damage, hard to see, all that. Goes really well with a creature that's got blind sight, obviously. I reused Ozyrandian later in Lost Mines of Phandelver to basically pimp out Venom Fang. So that was kind of fun. What else? I liked my dragons to have spells, so I gave him a couple of spells here. Message made sense, because he's, a soldier, works for an army, so being able to communicate with troops on the ground from the air would be important. Prestidigitation, why not? And then, keeping with the theme of Green Dragon, he had Sleep, Charm Person. I mean, a dragon that can sleep you. Think about that. You're low on health, the dragon's up in the air, it sleeps you, then it lands, and it insta-crits you, because you're unconscious on the ground. Like, crazy stuff. It was a crazy fight. Also, fighting a dragon out in the open, they were flabbergasted when the dragon, when they did manage to achieve their objective, but they hurt the dragon enough that it flew away. And
what's going on in here? Oh, nobody's here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm doing my post-mortem for Red-Handed Doom and Scales of War. So I'm just talking about the campaign. So I don't know. If you want to listen, that's cool. If you have any questions while I'm doing it, I mean, I'll answer them. But I'm not having a secret party without you, though, buddy. All right, and he's gone. Yeah. So the they just couldn't believe it. They're like, well, wait, why would the boss is leaving? And it's like, yeah, the boss is leaving. And they're like, bosses don't leave. I'm like, well, maybe not in video games, but like this dragon wants to live and he can fly, and he will. He's going to fly away. And it was like such a formative thing for them to like have this dragon like flee the field that they were just like, yeah, kind of blown away. But that did give them a chance to try and blow up this bridge. So they were fighting just so many dudes on this bridge, while also dealing with stuff over here. I think there was a war wizard over here, and she summoned like an air elemental, which, I mean, that ain't fair. So they're like dealing with an air elemental. Archers are firing at them. Pseudo hellhounds are breathing like lava breath at them. It was crazy. Eventually, Rurik and Riddles, the wood elf ranger, they decide to just suicide bomb the bridge. So they were told in advance, thanks to some research and whatnot, that there were some weak spots in the bridge. Rurik, using stone cunning, identified those weak spots, and then essentially they, like bungee cord style, leapt off the bridge, swung into the side of the bridge, blew the bridge up, kind of blew themselves up a bit in the process, fell into the river, the freaking bridge collapsed on top of them, and then Rurik and Riddles, who were very much like the Legolas and Gimli of the campaign, basically alternately took turns saving each other from like the wreckage of this entire bridge raining down from the sky on top of them. And I think in that moment, like, their friendship was like just forged, and it was incredible. And everybody was just so hype because destroying the bridge slowed down all of the advancement of the troops by like 5 to 7 days, which bought them like lots of time to move on to the next part of the campaign. So yeah, the Skull Gorge Bridge, freaking amazing fight, absolutely amazing. So the next part of the campaign was, okay, we have proof there really is an army. Now we need to let everybody else in El Surveil know that there is an army coming. What are we going to do about it? So they said, these are all the potential allies we have. What do you want to do? So the party was like, hey, magic elves, fairy elves, let's go with those first. So they journeyed to the Witchwood. And in the Witchwood, they encountered the elves. There was like a whole elven city map, which was really cool also. There was so much cool stuff in this campaign. Like, looking back, my heart is just so full of like good feels, like looking at some of the crazy stuff that they did here. Man. But what was the elf city called now? It's so hard to remember. There's so much going on. This one, maybe? Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, look at this thing. Oh, sorry. There's like a blood fog over it because later on it got taken over by blood hags from the Winter Court. And it was like a whole thing. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, so there's this gorgeous, look at this, fully explorable city map where they had to go around. It was full of elves, and oh man, it was awesome. Heroic Maps is just the best. So they had this thing, and they had to go meet with the elves, and they had to like parlay with the elves, and this was all still on script. This was all exactly as the written adventure had said it would be, so on and so forth. Well, the elves are busy fighting the Lizardfolk of the northern swamps, and they can't afford to fight enemies on both fronts, so the party either needs to go eliminate the Lizardfolk or convince the Lizardfolk to leave the elves alone, and then the elves are willing to essentially work with the party. So that's the next step, is they had to journey over to the marshes, and they had to try their hand at diplomacy with the Lizardfolk, which, now that I think about it, is it's exactly what happened in Saltmarsh in a way. There was a Lizardfolk diplomacy mission for that too, which happened chronologically, I guess, like D&D wise. That adventure, Danger at Dunwar, is way older than this adventure, but you know, there's only so many different adventures before you start recycling yourself, I guess. So they had to go and deal with these Lizardfolk, which also had a completely amazing, just an absolutely amazing map. They got the Lizardfolk attention by essentially killing a bunch of them and beating them up, and showing the Lizardfolk that they were really strong and the Lizardfolk should listen to them. And that worked. The Lizardfolk brought them back to their village, and they were able then to... here we go. New Jack Village. Where is that at? Oh, here we go. Yeah, look at this amazing village. It's just so cool. So many cool maps for this campaign. And just like Saltmarsh, this could have been a diplomacy mission, or this could have been the craziest fight of their lives if they tried to like kill the entire Lizardfolk population. But they come to the Lizardfolk Village, and they negotiate the release of a bunch of elven prisoners, and find out that the reason that the New Jack Lizardmen are going to war is because their babies have all been stolen by a black dragon, and they must do as the black dragon says, or they're never going to see their babies again. And if their babies could be returned to them, they would have no reason to listen to the black dragon, or if the black dragon could be killed and the babies returned, they would do basically whatever the party asked. They would become loyal allies of Elservale, leave the elves alone, and even help fight back against the Red Hand. So, that was, that's what the party was like, hey, you guys look pretty tough. I'd rather have you as allies than fight you. So they agreed to do just that. So they basically left the Lizardfolk behind. And this is where we first realized that big battles were going to take a really long time, even in Roll20, because the elves that they rescued agreed to go with them. So they ended up with, I think, 8 elves, and like the Lizardfolk gave them like 12 gators to help them. And yeah, then it was kind of a whole thing where they had like basically these extra troops. And that is where I started to realize that with excess like NPCs, you really, really, really have to find a way to make them work in the background. And it's like a pitfall that I, as a DM, fall into often, because you have all these cool units and you have Roll20 that's willing to roll all the dice for you and stuff, but like, don't do it. Don't do it. And I'll explain in a second, like, a solution for it that is starting to work, and I think I'm starting to feel comfortable with it after 26 years. And other, like, the players seem to prefer it also. And this happens in a lot of my campaigns, where it's like, you have people, they want to recruit NPCs, and you have NPCs that want to be recruited because people don't want to die, Like, swear to God, like, peace is better than war. It's true. And monsters and adventurers, they understand that, I hope, to a certain extent. So sometimes you end up with NPC bloat, and then you end up with your whole action economy screwed, and you end up with just a lot of slowdown in your session and your combat. So I had to develop, in this campaign specifically, ways to mitigate all that, and this next thing was the thing that sort of woke us up to that being a problem, which I think it was this map right here. Yeah, no, that is just the swamps where they kick the crap out of the Lizardfolk. Alright, let me see if was it Brindle here. Fetid swamp, nope. Nope. Marshland, maybe? Rest, here we go. Ruins of Rest. Alright. So, they had to go over to the Ruins of Rest. Look at the size of this map. It's just stupid. It's just stupid. So the Ruins of Rest were the leftover ruins of the ancient kingdom that shared the region with the dwarves like 500 plus years ago. And we never really talked too much about the ancient kingdom of Rest. There's like talk about how the dwarves used to rule Elservale, and then the kingdom of Rest was their allies. And then when the dwarves began like a civil war, the kingdom of Rest sort of just took over for a long time, and then they had their own internal strife, and then they sort of died out also, and then no kingdom took over Elservale, and it just sort of became like an independent nation of cities that working together, etc., etc. So these ruins was where the next dragon of the campaign was the Black Dragon. And this jabrones, man oh man, he was a bad dude. So he was in charge of turning the Lizardfolk eggs into spawn of Tiamat, or dragon spawn. By today's standards, they would just be Abishai. So he was basically creating his own Abishai, which is pretty nuts. I can't see his miniature, but he was a nasty little dragon. He was small for his size, but he had like wizard levels. Is this him right here? Rogeriax? Yeah, there we go. So there's Rogeriax, and he was a medium-sized dragon, even though I said they're super lame. And his claim to fame is that he was a very skilled spellcaster. So a lot of using invisibility and just all that good stuff. Let me see if we've got Rogeriax's character sheet. Or Rogerix. There we go. And again, there's like thousands of everything. There's just so much of everything. I don't know if it's going to find it or just die in the process. So yeah, Rogerix the Flesh Molder was his name. And I don't know if I still have his character sheet or not. But essentially, I took, I think, a mage... And I took, yeah, there's the Abishai he's making. Nasty, nasty out of the eggs. Pretty cool. That's from the original published adventure, that artwork. Rogerix. Is your art still in there, buddy? Doesn't look like it's loading. Oh, okay. Maybe. Yeah, Roll20, it's like, you haven't even accessed this character sheet in over a year, man. Or more. Okay, you just take my word for it. So, the fight against him was kind of awesome. He had lots of hobgoblin wizards. So, there were regular hobgoblins, hobgoblin wizards, there we go. And then this dude, Rogerix the Flesh Molder. So, his cool thing was, in addition to being a rather well... Yeah, look at this, greater visibility. Give me a break. While he... was very powerful spellcaster, he also had sticky acid breath. So his acid breath would hit you, and then if you failed your save, it would stick to you, and you would take ongoing acid damage. So that was kind of cool. So, but yeah, ultimately they kicked this dude's butt, and then during the fight, Green Abishai started coming out of the well over here. If you play in one of my games and you see a well, like 80% chance there's probably a dungeon in that well. I feel like in a world full of Underdarks and dungeons, you can't dig a well without hitting a dungeon. But yeah, his lair was down this well, and this is where this is where the party started to get into a lot of fights. Honestly, up until this point, the party got along pretty good. But this particular set, this next thing that happened, is very much where they all started to butt heads about a lot of things all the time. So the first thing was the party's resident murder hobo, Riddles the Wood Elf Rogue Ranger. He was very much everything you think of when you think of a murder hobo. It is like, I'm taking all the loot. I'm taking all your loot. If this NPC isn't like completely required for advancement of the story and the quest, I'm gonna kill it. No compunction, nothing. So, also, very stealthy, and the rest of the party not good at detecting stealth. So a lot of times Riddles would kind of wander off on his own. One of the things Riddles did is he went over into this here chapel and killed the dudes inside, and then found a Lich's Phylactery, which is, again, totally from the written adventure. The Red Hand had stolen a phylactery from the local Lich, and they had stored it here in like a lockbox, basically, in like a lead-lined lockbox, and Riddles found it. He did not tell the rest of the party about it. So that was kind of... that happened. He did all this while they were out like fighting the dragon, essentially. So there were some feels. Seeing that monsters were coming out of the well, they went down into the well, but down in the well, Jericho dropped his weapon, and being a variant human glaive fighter, became completely powerless without it. And so the rest of the party spent forever trying to find his glaive that had sunk to the bottom of the reservoir. And while they were doing that, Riddles the Rogue snuck on ahead, snuck past the ambient guardians that were still down in the well, and just started rage looting Rogeriax's treasure. Which, again, I didn't run separate sessions, so the rest of the party, the players, knew that this was happening. And had to basically roleplay that they didn't, which is a lot of bad feels. I like player agency, but public service announcement, guys, maybe don't be assholes to each other when you play D&D. Pro tip. So they went down into the dragon's lair. There we go. And party rogue / ranger is way up ahead, rage loot and everything, and they're having to sort of fight their way through because there's these ambient animated thorns and vines that are trying to stop them, and there's traps and everything that the rogue has just moved on past without any warning. Now you might say, what's with all the fire? Well, yeah, so they come around the corner, they deal with the leftover green Abishai that were being created. Nope, not fire. Green Abishai. These guys. And they see all these eggs over there. And they're the eggs of the Lizardfolk, for sure. And some of the eggs have been corrupted. They can't tell which eggs are corrupted and which eggs aren't corrupted. Before they could really make up their minds about what to do, Rurik, the Phoenix Sorcerer, the dwarf who's in trouble with the other dwarves for not helping the dwarf prisoners when he had the chance, launches a fireball and blows up all the babies. Just kills all the babies. All of them. There's no time to sort it out. Crack eggs to make an omelet. We can't afford to have these dudes on the loose. We gotta take care of biz. So he blows them all up. That was problematic. Yeah, especially since a Lizardfolk had joined the party at this point and just watched one of the Order blow up all of their babies. That's where we ended that session. So suffice to say, it was a really stressful week where the players had to figure out what are we gonna do, because we just liberated the Lizardfolk from their enemies, but we killed all their children, basically. So, right? So that was rough. There was talk about killing the new PC who was a Lizardfolk, and then lying to them about what happened. Ultimately, the guy that played Rurik, he opted to have Rurik flee, so that the Order would not be implicated. Essentially, he would have gone rogue and done this and then used flight and flew away before the party could stop him, kind of thing, and play a different character, which was a pretty elegant solution, honestly. So basically, yeah, that's where things started to get real hot. Is you had people who were obviously in real life good people, right? They were like, bro, you killed a bunch of babies. And then you had people who were a little, morally gray, who were like, for, an okay reason. And then you had people who were extremely rational, the people that are like, how could you be scared of a horror movie? It's not real, those people. And they're like, who cares? It's a game. None of these things are real. They're just like pictures on a screen, like, which is sad, right? Because you do want to have some immersion and some like emotional investment into what's going on. But ultimately, it started to sort of create fractures in the order's, I guess, unity, because people were like, what are we willing to do to stop the Red Hand? That's where it started to kind of really heavily come into play. So ultimately they got out. They did very well on their diplomacy. They blamed the whole thing on Rurik and the Red Hand, essentially, and basically told the lizard folk that the Red Hand, that Rurik worked for the Red Hand, essentially, and they, double agent kind of thing. And so now the lizard folk hate the Red Hand, and they hate dwarves. So they're going to do anything they can to stop the Red Hand and stop the dwarves. So, that was a whole huge arc of the campaign. From that point forward, the adventure basically had a whole chapter that was like, here's a bunch of random stuff they could do now. They don't have enough time to do it all. The things that they do in this chapter will determine ultimately their success for the end of the game. And there was even like a mini game, essentially, where I had to keep track of like points that they would earn for accomplishing certain things. One of the things was dealing with this dude, the Ghost Lord. So down here, there's this place called the Thorn Waste, and that is where the Ghost Lord lives. Now, the Ghost Lord is an OG, badass, druid lich. So in 5th edition terms, he would be like a Circle of the Spore, lich, druid thing. He was very strong. Campaign accounts of people trying to fight him, many people died if they tried to fight him. The way that they wrote the adventure was that you would return his phylactery to him, and in exchange for returning it, he would basically join up against the Red Hand of Doom to get revenge. Well, obviously, there's some moral issues here, right? Because he's an admittedly evil, by all accounts, lich, who, leaves everybody alone, but he's still a lich, so he's bad. He's a bad dude. He's got undead everywhere. He's a bad guy. So the party really struggled with, like, should we fight him? Should we not fight him? Should we help him? Should we not help him? If he helps us, like, what is the consequence of that going to be? So, like, this is where the campaign, because of, like, the sort of Mass Effect style, like, politics, like the different factions and recruiting the different factions, this is where it really started to just drive a divide between the players. The players were also pissed off at the dwarves because the dwarves wouldn't automatically just say, sure, we'll fight the hobgoblins. The dwarves were like, we don't want to get involved. We're like well fortified down here. The last time we got in a fight, we lost our whole kingdom. We're not going to like waste our resources on this. This is the surface people's problem. This is not a dwarf issue. So they were pissed off at the dwarves for that. The dwarves were pissed off at them for the kid getting killed. It was a whole thing. They had an option of going to help the Goliaths of Red Rock, who were always dealing with nasty mountain creatures. They had the option of going down to Hillwatch and helping the halflings. There was all sorts of different groups and factions that they could go and help. Ultimately, they decided that they needed a better weapon. So that was one thing that they wanted to do. And so they researched the ancient heroes of rest. And this is where some homebrew came in. They found out about the 7 weapons of rest from the 7 heroes of rest who were buried throughout Elstervale. And these were essentially 7 side quest dungeons, or 6 because you found the first one at Wrathkeep. If they wanted to get cool magic items to help them with the campaign at the expense of recruiting better units for their actual war. Because again, there's a time limit. But they did decide that they wanted to get a badass glaive for their human variant, or variant human glaive fighter. So they had to journey to Marth Forest, where they would find essentially the shrine dedicated to one of the heroes, which then took them to her actual grave at the top of the Giant Shield Mountains. And it was up there that they had their first optional boss fight, and man, was it a doozy. Like, it was crazy. So they had to go up to the Shrine of the Wind, and they're still babies, and the Shrine of the Wind is very high up on the tallest mountain in the world. There was like wind effects going on, all sorts of craziness. And the boss that they had to fight was a Void Dragon from Tomb of Beasts, I believe, which is just a super cool dragon, and it's very, very tough. But I kept telling him, like, this guy's really tough. You don't have to fight him if you don't want to. Blah, 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 blah. This is him right here. Dilerian the Emptiness. And this is where, for me, like, a lot of the groundwork for, like, heavy rewrites for Skills of War came in, was with this side quest. And that's kind of where it really started. So they came here early on. They appeared at this teleporter. They had to cross this precarious bridge. I mean, look at how far down it is. That's ridiculous. So they're like tightening like ropes and tying ropes to each other and making their way through and climbing up. And they go to basically get this weapon from this ghost. And this ghost appears. Here she is right here. And they're like, hey, we want your weapon. And she's just like, if you want it, you got to prove that you could have it. You know, Final Fantasy boss style. You got to beat me to get my power, sort of thing. So, they did. And basically she said, if you fight me, it has to be one-on-one. Well, the rest of the party couldn't stand by and do that. So they jumped in. And when they jumped in, that's when Dilerian the Emptiness joined the fight. And it got real crazy real fast. Someone got thrown off a mountain. They died. There was a lot of killing. A lot of death. I think they had 2 deaths in this fight. And they could only afford to bring one person back. So the other person was just dead forever. I think they ate that person because they were a lizard folk. It was kind of a murder hobo party. Ultimately, they defeat her, but they don't defeat Dilerian, obviously, because he's super strong. And she yields and tells Dilerian to back down. It was one of those fights where, like, if you waste your time fighting this dude instead of, like, the real target, you're gonna die. And eventually they realized that, and they just focus fired on her. They dropped her. They won the weapon. Now their dude's super strong. Now they're going to head out and start kicking ass. So then they go to deal with the Ghost Lord. Now, the Ghost Lord ended up being named Varathian, but that wasn't actually his name. Varathian was the name of the blue dragon of the campaign, but I got their names mixed up, and I kind of had to own it, because I had explained it away as the dude's name was Varathian. So then I had to come up with a new name for the blue dragon, and that whole thing happened. So there was like a heavy rewrite right there. So, yeah. They go to the Thorn Waste, which is sort of like Shadowfell-esque, before the Shadowfell was really a thing. And they eventually make their way to Varathian, aka the Ghost Lord. And this is also scripted from the book that Varathian is basically being babysat by a worm lord who is a half elf, half hobgoblin. Okay. Which I ended up rewriting her to just be like the Queen of Thorns. So sort of like a throwback to the beginning of the game, and then also bringing in one of the characters' like backstories to kind of tie it to the adventure a little bit more. So that was kind of cool. But they had a big ass throwdown against her and this blue dragon. And this wasn't any normal blue dragon. This was a half blue dragon, half Behir. Which, if you know about D&D lore, you know that Behir are like living weapons that were created by the giants to fight dragons. They hate dragons. So, like, a half-blue dragon Behir, it don't even make no sense. And that's fine. I will tell you this, that in converting the half-blue dragon Behir over, I definitely made it too strong. Like, I made it really strong. And it almost killed everybody. Yeah, it almost killed everybody. It was a real bad fight. It was a bad enough fight that they had nothing left in the tank when the Ghost Lord kind of walked out of his house, which was a giant stone lion in the middle of a swamp, and was like, what are you doing here? And, you know, they're like, we're here to... we're here to parlay, essentially, is what happened. Yeah, so I don't even know. I don't even remember what the Behir's name was, because I had to give her a new name. I think she was like something, the Raging Storm or something. But, yeah, there's the giant lion that he lives inside. This is where the big fight went down against... against the half-blue dragon and the essentially Worm Lord Lady Pants. Oh, here we go. She ended up being named Lithrazzle the Storm, which is, you know, it's cool, I guess. Let's see. And she had a pretty cool mini, though, I thought. I don't know. I mean, you know, obvious Photoshop is obvious, but hey. And she was a beast. She was beast mode. Mostly because I gave her the ability to summon storm elementals, which is a homebrew monster in the first place. So imagine like an air elemental that has high DPS. Yeah, it got pretty crazy. So she's summoning these storm elementals. She's flying around. She's fighting them. People are dying left and right. The party's losing all of its cohesion. They're not, like, healing each other when they're down. They're only worrying about themselves. It was a hard fight. I think 2 people permanently died in this fight. So with 2 people down and no resources left, when the Ghost Lord finally showed up, they were just like, yeah, so we found your phylactery. We wanted to give it back to you. And so they ended up teaming up with him. So, hey, congrats to the original writers. Things went their way. Now, I have heard that the writers did basically give you a get-out-of-jail-free card, because back in 3.5, undead were harmed by healing. And the Staff of Life that you found in Wrathkeep could cast the heal spell. So, if you ran up and you hit the Ghost Sword upside the head with it and cast heal... heal used to heal all of your HP except for like 1d4. So on an undead, it would reduce them to having only 1d4 hit points. It was like the equivalent of using like a Phoenix down on an undead monster in Final Fantasy. So the idea, and this was of course a day and age where shit didn't have legendary resistances and stuff like that. Like you try that nowadays, and a boss would just be like, cool, that's a cool story. I legendary resist it so that the fight doesn't end in the first 6 seconds. But when they wrote it, they were like, see, we're okay. We can have this 20th level Druid Lich, because, you know, the 9th level party that's going to confront him can just hit him with this stick if they really want to fight him. After they're done fighting the half-blue dragon Behir outside? Question mark. So they made friends with the Ghost Lord, I guess you could call it that. And this is where things got even worse. Because I am a big fan of Zugtamoy. From, like the goddess of like rot and decay and fungus and mushrooms and all that. And I was like, this is a spore druid. He's like, maybe he has a patron. Maybe that patron's Zugtamoy. Wouldn't it be kind of cool? Kind of bring Zugtamoy in on this action just a little bit. Spice things up a little bit. So he made the party an offer that, if we're allies, why don't we go all the way? Why don't you embrace the power of my god and get super strong? Like, how dedicated are you to defeating your enemies? And so he basically offered them blessings of Zugtamoy, and two of them took them. Murder Hobo Deluxe Riddles, the Rogue Ranger, took it. And also, Frontliner Jericho took it. And don't get me wrong, it made them hella strong. They got a +4 to their constitution, but then they also had a -4 bonus to their intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And they were able to cast like Ray of Sickness, Suggestion, Plant Growth. Cool stuff. They're immune to Charm, immune to Frightened. And then they regenerate hit points constantly. Like, they were like, it was a mixed bag, obviously. But here at the very bottom, you see you are 100% devoted to Zugtamoy. Her spores infest every cell of your being. This is when these players, who this was their first D&D campaign, realized that not everybody out there has your best interests at heart. And if you make a pact with like a demon goddess, like, it's probably not going to turn out too good for you. But they did it. And they lived with the consequences of it, and they were hella strong for the time that they had left. So there was that. But now, they've secured this powerful ally. They've secured the alliance of the elves and the lizard folk. They have to hope, essentially, that they've done enough, because time is running out. So they returned to Brindle, and they had this huge battle at Brindle. And the Battle of Brindle was like... Well, the Battle of Brindle was crazy. It was basically like a whole mini game in and of itself, where we made a grocery list of all the major bad guys that were left and all the major good guys that they had recruited, and they had to slot out like who's fighting who. It was very much like the Stronghold and Followers like warfare rules, but before they had been released to the public situation. And then they had to essentially we rolled. With some modifiers to see which faction, which groups won in the conflicts. And then that determined like the course of the Battle of Brindle. It was during that time that they finally got to fight the Red Dragon, who was a Bithriax. And a Bithriax, I was playing a lot of Monster Hunter at the time. And the Red Hand had a lot of Manticores. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if a Bithriax was half Red Dragon, half Manticore? And that's how Teostra ended up in Red-Handed Doom. So they got to fight Teostra, and Teostra was an awesome fight, in my opinion. Some of the players maybe didn't agree, but he definitely was a beast, and he kicked a lot of ass. So they had these fights, and these fights waged all over the city of Brelin. And when it was over, they had to finally face off against the main general of the Red-Handed Doom. And in defeating him, they were like, it's over, it's over. And then, of course, like, cinematic scene, the weather suddenly turns like super dark and ominous. Thunder and lightning coming from the mountains to the west. They realize that it's not over, that all of the fighting and all of the war and all of the killing has all been sacrifices made to Tiamat, and they have to travel to capital F Final Dungeon and defeat Tiamat's High Priest and take him out, and therefore save the game. It had a very Final Fantasy RPG feeling to it, where you think you've killed the final boss, and then you realize that he was not the final boss. And so they realize, oh my gosh, the reason there's these dragons is Tiamat. The reason they're the 5 hands is Tiamat's a 5-headed dragon, 5 fingers, 5 heads. It all started to kind of fall into place. So they journeyed to, they got all their preparations made. They said their goodbyes. They did all the things they needed to do, and they set off for their final mission to do all that stuff. So they journeyed via their flying mounts across El Vale. They went to the Fane of Tiamat, which there was a super dope-ass map for. It was a top-down screenshot from World of Warcraft for the outside. And basically, that's where they had to fight the White Dragon. And he was a legit ancient white dragon. And his special thing was his breath weapon could freeze you into like solid blocks of ice. I will say that Swordbard proved to me that it is super viable because a Hexblade Swordbard stood on a pillar of ice and basically solo tanked this this ancient white dragon. And I will still remember that as being one of the hyper things that I've seen in D&D, was seeing this he was like little teenage Tabaxi, and he's standing at the top of this ice pillar all by himself while the rest of the party is flying around dealing with ice gargoyles and what else do they have? We'll restore final battle and Fane of Tiamat outdoor. Let's see if that's the right map. Yep, so many maps. So many maps for this campaign. Nope. That's not the right Fane of Tiamat. Let's see. But basically, they go into the fortress, and the fortress has got crazy amounts of traps and stuff like that, which is all taken directly from the written adventure. Now, the written adventure, it really started to like lose it in the final bits, because like the final dungeon, a lot of people felt like this very huge dungeon that just sort of got tacked on at the end, and it was full of like weird shit that didn't make a lot of sense in context with everything else. So ultimately I added like an entire like prison complex to the bottom, and like I had to add like a barracks to the thing. But at the same time, we wanted to like get things done, so we just they kind of speed ran the final dungeon. They did go down into the basement though, and while they were down there, they found an individual named Charles Pendington, and that became the replacement for Jericho, who died on the assault against the Fane of Tiamat. Here we go, Fane entrance. That's what we're looking for. This was such a cool looking map. Right? Yeah. And at this point, everybody can fly and stuff. And here's that little Tabaxi standing on the pillar of ice, fighting this like ancient white dragon. Oh, so hype. This is one of the times where they definitely missed like a huge treasure cache, because up here there was like the entrance to the white dragon's lair, but because they were always in such a big hurry, they went right past it. So they missed all the treasure that was here, and it was like a lot of treasure, according to the adventure. There was some real good stuff in there. They spent a lot of time like really poor in this campaign because they were always rushing. So a lot of times they would miss treasure and just kind of run past it, that kind of thing. So they made it inside. They went down into the dungeons. They fought some bone devils. They fought lots of guardians, lots of giants. Eventually they make it to the final battle, and one of the party members who is obsessed with teleportation, Rurik, he doesn't trust the teleporter. He's convinced that the teleporter that leads to the final boss is trapped, and he needs to examine it. The rest of the party doesn't want to wait. They go into the teleporter. He doesn't. Essentially, if we were sticklers to the rules, he would have missed the final battle, because a fight in D&D usually doesn't last more than a minute. So if he spends a minute or 10 minutes studying the teleporter that everybody else went through, he'd miss the entire fight. So it was one of those times where you just tell the rules to kiss your butt kind of thing, because you don't want anybody at your table to not be able to participate if you can prevent it kind of thing. And like, it would have been kind of sad if you couldn't make it. So final battle against Tiamat, another absolutely gorgeous map from Heroic Maps. Way cooler looking than the map that was provided in the original adventure, but same premise. Big platform, you have to face off against her cleric, Azar-Kul, who is a half-blue dragon, hobgoblin, cleric fighter, paladin. He was very multi-classed, of Tiamat. And he had his 5 dragon priests, basically. So you had to fight like 6 clerics. Like 6 clerics for the final battle, which was really hard. And then, just to make it even harder, there were like ambient traps in the room, and there were statues that had like forbidden spells on them. And those, I think, were actually in the original adventure. Like, it was a pretty hard fight in the original adventure. It was pretty rough. Essentially, I gave them like many ways to win this fight, one of which was to actually defeat Tiamat when she showed up, one of which was to kill Azar-Kul fast enough that he couldn't finish the thing. They weren't able to do that because, I mean, 6 clerics. They were just like healing each other left and right. The other one was to destroy these 5 basically receptacles that were absorbing the power of all the souls who were killed during the war against the Red Hand. Basically, every soldier that was dying on the battlefield, every villager that was killed, every dragon whose life was taken, their souls were all being redirected here to power this gate that would allow Tiamat into the world. And so then she shows up looking fine, and they tried to battle her, and they realized very quickly that shit ain't gonna happen. And so they decided they needed to, bust these crystals and get everybody free. Or not free. Free all the souls, and then therefore break the portal, and the portal would like vacuum her, back into Avernus. And then she kind of dragged Azar-Kul in there with him, a la, I don't know, the end of Aladdin, where Iago gets pulled into the lamp or some shit. This fight was rough. It was super rough. I looked at it, I mathed it out. I was using the Tiamat from the published adventure about Tiamat and the Dragon Queen, Horde of the Dragon Queen, something like that. And she was bad. She's a bad bitch. And the party was strong, but 6 clerics after you fought your way through the super dungeon. After you fought an ancient white dragon outside, you've had like no chance to rest. So essentially, that's when Bahamut stepped in and was like, I can't fight my sister directly, but I could definitely help you guys. So like 7 canaries showed up, and each one had a different blessing. It kind of golden canary like flew down and would hit somebody, and they'd like revivify with full health, like the whole deal. So it kind of gave them all like a second wind. Even with that, I think there were like 2 people still standing at the end of this fight. And like the last guy was like the moon druid, who basically limped across the battlefield and hit the last soul well one last time to like end it. It was crazy. And that was the end of Red Hand of Doom. Yeah. So woof. Red Hand of Doom ran levels 1 through levels 14, I want to say. And it was bananas. At the end of the campaign, the players were like, we definitely want to run the sequel, Scales of War. And I was like, you don't want to do that, trust me. And they're like, no, we definitely do. We want to run it. And I'm like, no, trust me. You do not want to do high level. High level is crazy. It's like a lot of bookkeeping. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of abilities. You don't want to do that. They were like, no, we definitely want to do it. We want to do it. In my heart of hearts, I did not want to run a high level game because I'm very busy. And high level games, high level games are a lot of work. And Skills of War is a 4th edition adventure, which means it would be another one that I'd have to convert everything over for. All the miniatures, all the maps, everything from scratch. And a lot of people I had talked to were like, you gotta make smarter choices about this stuff. You have to just start running like published stuff that you can use the pre-made assets for, because you're gonna kill yourself trying to make all this stuff from scratch. Like, you gotta just do some published stuff. Well, I don't listen to nobody for nothing. So ultimately, I wanted to see it go all the way to 20 because there were some parts of Skills of War that were amazing, and I really wanted to see them happen. And there were some parts of Skills of War that were terrible that I was like, I guess we could just skip those parts. Skills of War was very much the sequel no one asked for that tried to ride the coattails of its successor. This adventure, Red Hand of Doom, phenomenal. I would recommend it anytime. I would say if you have a group and they want to do a super action adventure oriented game, like a campaign that is just straight action all the time with a little bit of diplomacy and like war strategy thrown in, like, this is a great campaign. It's focused, it's crazy, the threat level is high, the stakes are high, the difficulty is high. If you have a group that's into that, Red Hand of Doom is amazing. I wouldn't recommend trying to do Skills of War. Skills of War was a lot of work, a lot of rewrites, a lot of difficult rewrites, yeah. And I'll talk about that in a bit, but I want to like finish up on this so I can stop streaming and have this as a separate piece and then do Skills of War as its own piece. But to answer, like, I guess some points and questions that need to be discussed about Red Hand of Doom. With Red Hand of Doom, the theme and expectation from the very beginning when it was advertised as a small few against many overwhelming odds. It's important when you advertise a campaign, when you get a group together to run a campaign, it is very, 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 very important that you put the expectations for the campaign up front. You have to tell people up front, this is the kind of campaign this is going to be. Because campaigns take a long time. Like, Skills of War ran, like, I believe it was like 9 months. That's a lot of time for these people to invest, time and resources into their characters, into the game, into playing, events that they canceled so that they could come to the game instead. Like, it was a commitment that was made by everybody involved. And it's a lot easier for people to honor those commitments if the expectations are put out front. So again, just tell the players that you're recruiting for your games. And we're in the golden age of Dungeons and Dragons right now. There is no shortage of people that want to play Dungeons and Dragons. So make sure that the people that you're recruiting for the game are people that are going to enjoy the game that you are running. Right? Like, not everybody I know would have enjoyed Red Hand of Doom. Like, a lot of people would have been crazy stressed out by this game. They would have been angry about the timer. They would have been angry about the morally gray decisions they had to make, a la Mass Effect. They would have been angry that they had to choose one faction over another. They would not have been okay with this style of game. if anything, if I could go back, post-mortem, an actual post-mortem part, if I could go back and do it again, knowing more about the campaign, I would definitely spin it as being very Mass Effect 2. You know, I would just say, like, you are facing impossible odds while also trying to recruit other people to help you with impossible odds, and those other people are not friendly with each other. So you're going to gain one ally and, like, gain an enemy in the process, essentially. Like, you can't make everyone happy. You can't do everything there is to do. Like, you are going to pick the renegade option sometimes, and you're going to choose the paragon option other times. You're going to make the decision that is best for Elser Vale. You're not going to make so much the decision that is best for your lawful good paladin. You need to know up front that, like, if your character is willing to die by their beliefs, they might take the entire population of, like, the continent with them. Like, that's the kind of, like, hard knocks news that I think I would have put up front before the campaign, so that we could have hopefully avoided a little bit more of that. It's a lesson that I've learned with my latest campaign, Odyssey of the Dragonlords. I just put it out there. I said, this campaign is anti-Titans, pro-human settlers. You can make non-human characters, but they need to be, like, human sympathists. Like, you can't have, like, edgelord, baby of the evil Titan warlock who is secretly going to betray the party. Like, you need to know up front that I'm running a game for a party that is aligned with these same goals. And if you're not going to do that, then that character is not welcome. And if you don't want to compromise, then you are not welcome. Like, we will find somebody else to play. For a long, ongoing campaign, a campaign that you are taking very seriously, you need to be willing to make the sacrifices to create a group that will have fun together. Like, and that, I think, is one of the hardest things about being a DM, is kind of telling people, like, this is the group that I chose, or, like, you're not the best fit for this group, because not every campaign is the right fit for every player, and not every group is the right fit for every player. And the biggest part of that is being open and honest up front about what kind of campaign it's going to be. So that's definitely the biggest thing I learned from this. The other thing I learned from this is that timers on a campaign, they add stress to the campaign for sure. Saltmarsh, it's pseudo sandbox, so there's a lot of side quests. The side quests don't stay available forever, because for similitude, right, it wouldn't make sense. It's not Skyrim, right? A quest isn't going to just stay there until the party comes along and solves it. Like, it's either going to resolve itself positively or negatively, or some other adventuring party is going to come along and take the job and solve it. And this is something that I do in all the games that I run. So there is a certain amount of campaign timer in every game I run, where the world doesn't wait for you. Like, the world exists, and it does its own thing. I have a calendar. I use the calendar for every game. I have a Google spreadsheet that tracks the calendar for every campaign that I run. There are events on the calendar. There are things that happen the players don't know about. There are things that happen that the players do know about. There are holidays that happen. There's weather that happens. This kind of stuff, I hope, makes the world feel like a real thing that needs them, but also will function without them. That they are obviously the main characters of the story we are telling, but they are not the heart that pumps blood to the entire world, right? They are the heroes of the story, but the world itself, it's going to keep going. It's going to have to keep going. That's what makes it real, right? That being said, campaign timer, is a very stressful mechanic to have in a campaign. So if you're running a game like Red Hand of Doom, you really want to think hard about the timer. You could always go in and change the timer to be longer or shorter if you see fit. But remember that once you kind of establish that there is a timetable, you got to stick to that. You got to be consistent with that. Or the players may resent the fact that they rushed around and missed out on things because you told them there was a timer. If you say there's a timer and you don't stick to that timer, you're doing a disservice to the campaign, to your players' efforts, and to yourself. So just remember that a timer is a powerful and dangerous mechanic to have in your campaign. It is 100% going to change everything about your game. So please, please, please use caution when you introduce a timer to your campaign, because that is going to change everything. So honestly, for Red Hand, those were the two biggest takeaways for me. Was careful with timers, and understand that as much as you can ahead of time, kind of explain to people what kind of campaign they're getting into. Because like this was a very unique beast, in my opinion, of a campaign. It was a joy to run and experience, and just the monsters that they fought and the battles that they had were absolutely phenomenal. It set them up for some of the wildest, craziest high-level gameplay I've ever seen in my life afterwards. And I'm very glad that I got to run it. But and I think at some point I would run it again for sure, because it was great. But again, I would definitely run it in such a way that it would end here in this room, that there would not be anything else happening. Like we would tie all the strings up, and that would be the end of it. Just because there's a lot of stories I'd like to tell again, and I don't think that Scales of War is necessarily one of those stories. But Red Hand of Doom definitely was. So, yeah. But yeah, that's my post-mortem for Red Hand of Doom. Was tremendous amount of work. Conversions. Oh yeah, that's the last thing on there. Well, no, there's two other things on there. So we talked about pacing, we talked about group composition, themes and expectations, sort of talked about conversions. Fortunately, we live in the golden age of gaming and also of information technology. So there were a lot of people who had already converted a lot of stuff over. Google is your friend. You can find those notes and all that jazz. I think there's somebody who did a Kickstarter or something for like a 5th edition conversion of the entire thing. I don't know if that ever actually happened. But yeah, there's plenty of solutions out there to convert every single part of this. Honestly, a lot of conversion for this wasn't too hard. I mean, a hobgoblin is a hobgoblin. A hobgoblin wizard is a hobgoblin wizard. A hobgoblin monk is a hobgoblin, I think they're called Iron Fist or something like that. And the wizards are called Devastators. But if you have access to Volos, and Mordenkainen's and the Monster Manual, you have enough monsters there that you could just reskin to win, essentially. So if there's like a 3rd edition monster that they didn't convert over, you just find something similar, and then you're good to go. Like when I say reskin to win, I mean you take a Hellhound, you turn it into a Dragonhound by, changing Fiend to say Dragon. Bam, you're done. The one thing I will say about conversions is if you're converting beasts over, more than likely you just want to make them monsters, because beast can be polymorphed into, beast can be wild shaped into, and beast can be easily summoned with summoning magic and familiar spells. So monsters can't. So if you don't think that the conversion that you're doing is going to be balanced, do not keep it a beast. Just say, it's just like an owlbear. It's a monstrosity. It's kind of a beast, but it's not. That is my advice there for conversions, is keep an eye out for beasts, and generally you can reskin anything to be anything you need. There's no reason to completely reinvent an entire stat block if you don't have to. Yeah. Also, just accept that sometimes you're going to goof and have a backup plan. If you're the kind of DM that fudges their rolls, then you don't have a problem. You just lie your way to success. So good for you. If you are a kind of DM that has the rolls out on the table, conversion is a much scarier endeavor, because you are kind of owning whatever rolls come out. And if that monster that you thought it was a great idea that they could critical hit on a 17 or higher, critical hits the entire fight, well, you did it, so you have to own it. I guess a good rule of thumb is don't allow something that could be rolled for if you're not okay with it being rolled for. Right? Like, don't give Tiamat like a 1 in 100 chance of insta-killing the party, because RNGesus will make sure that she automatically kills the party. Don't allow a player to roll to seduce Tiamat and succeed on a nat 20, because it's going to succeed on a nat 20, because RNGesus is cruel. So anytime you tempt fate like that, just keep in mind that it could happen. Don't think to yourself, wouldn't this be neat if? Plan on it actually happening. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also, when you convert something over, sometimes, more is good, right? Like if a monster has like a lot of cool stuff and you're like, that's a lot of cool stuff. Well, you don't have to use all that stuff. So Tiamat, if I took the 3rd edition version and I mashed it up with the 5th edition version, she would have a lot of abilities. I don't have to use all those abilities. If the fight starts and it looks like she's going to completely smoke them, well, there's no reason to throw that out there, right? I can just go with the more manageable abilities. So with conversion, you have to understand that like nothing's set in stone. No one's forcing you to publish your conversions. Like the players don't get to audit the conversions to see how things were and what they were going to be. So just, keep that in mind. So that is that. The last thing I want to talk about is player death. So this was a hard campaign, and a lot of people died. And even though there was a staff of life, aka the staff of continuation, that could bring people back to life, sometimes people died by being thrown off of mountains. Sometimes they died by having their guts blasted out of their body by lightning bolts. There were times where a revivify or a raise dead just wasn't going to cut it. There were a lot of deaths. There were 2 players in the group who were character polyamorous, right? They loved every character that they ever thought of ever. They were at work and they thought of a new character. They wanted to play that character. They played a video game and there was a character in the game that they wanted to make into a D&D character. They wanted to play that character. As a fledgling DM for hire, right? I very much wanted to do the customer is always right. So they would come to me and say, I know I'm playing this character, but I'd want to play Geralt of Rivia. And I would say, well, sure. You're the customer, right? Here's the problem with that. This particular campaign already struggled to establish like strong roleplay opportunities, because other than the like handful of like diplomatic scenes where you met with leaders and the leaders were basically like, diplomacy's cool, but this is D&D and we want you to do a quest to earn our loyalty and not just make a persuasion roll. There wasn't a lot of roleplay in the campaign. So whatever roleplay was happening between the characters during the fights, during the adventures, during the exploration. To constantly have like a revolving door on like 2 of the player slots where the 2 guys were constantly shuffling characters through the door, it was jarring, like there was like the core characters of Riddles, Jericho, and Rurik, and then eventually Tusco, the halfling druid. But the other two guys were just like a revolving door of new characters. Like every other week, it felt like there was a new character coming in, and part of that was the campaign was really hard, and they would play sloppy. And part of it was they weren't invested enough in any of their characters to play more defensively. So, like, there was a constant shifting of characters throughout the campaign. And I think that kind of hurts it narratively to a certain extent. Because the longer your characters are together, like, the stronger their bonds are going to be. Like, the more they're going to work to help each other, the more they're going to work to come up with strategies to synergize their abilities. The more invested they are in mutual success of other people in the party, the more willing they are to compromise on values. If like they're constantly being told every couple sessions, like, oh yeah, you find this new person and you're going to adventure with this person because they also want to beat up Tiamat, like, that's cool and all. Video games, that happens all the time. You get guest characters that are also like, we want to fight the darkness. It's like, cool, let's do it together. But like, you don't care about those characters, right? Like, they're NPCs. You know what I'm saying? I think the problem is, for the most part, like, slots P5 and P6, right? They became like NPCs. So there wasn't that connection there that, as a DM, I was used to seeing in a game, because I hadn't really seen people that wanted to swap out the characters that frequently in a very long time. And honestly, I didn't really know what kind of impact it was going to have on the game. Overall, I think it had a pretty bad impact on the game. Now, when I'm running games, if people are like, I really don't like this character, I want to try something else, I'll say, well, why don't you like that character? And they might say, oh, well, I made this character thinking that I wanted to be a healer, but then I really would rather be like DPS. And then it's like, because we already have like 2 healers in the party and it seems silly to have 3 healers. And I'll say, like, but what's your problem with the character? And they're like, oh, well, nothing's wrong with the character. And I'll just say, all right, look, we need to come up with something that will work for you to keep having fun, but, don't abandon the character. Like, we can make changes to the character to work. I would rather respec a build than abandon a character that is invested in the world and that other characters are invested in. Like, you don't realize it, but like, the other people in the group, like, they pay attention to your character. Like, your character does things that affects them. Like, your character saves their life. Your character is a big part of their world, It's not just some random thought construct for you. It's something that is shared with the group. And to sort of yank that away from everybody over and over and over again, like, eventually you're not going to have the same bonds and the same friendship and the same loyalty and the same willingness to compromise that you would have if you stuck with it. So that's something else this campaign taught me, was player death is bad enough. Like, constantly having characters die, that's rough. Like, that hurts the narrative quite a bit. Because a lot of times the characters start to get real hard, right? They get hardened because everyone I love dies. So I'm not gonna make friends anymore. These are my allies in the battlefield, and that's that. You end up with a bunch of grizzled veterans, smoking cigars, with scars down their face, with their eyes all whited out. They're all just, I've seen things, kid, and I'll never love again. That kind of thing. And it's like, Yeah, you don't want that to be you don't need that to be everybody in the group. You know what I'm saying? And then exacerbating that was we had characters that came and went that didn't die. The players just didn't want to play them anymore. Because they were like, well, I don't really like playing a gnome, or I don't really want to be a lizard folk anymore, or I thought being a witcher would be cool, but I'd much rather be this. So like that eventually kind of, broke down what could have been a very strong party into basically like a small group, and they're randomly shifted out NPCs. So definitely something to watch out for in future games. So, but I think for now, I've talked enough about Red Hand of Doom, what I learned from it, and the next time I do this is going to be to address Skills of War, converting a 4th edition adventure path to 5th edition, and running a game up to level 20, and the different things I learned from that, because damn did I learn a lot from that one. But again, if you are looking for an action adventure campaign that is heavy duty on the action, heavy duty on the few heroes against the possible odds, I can't recommend highly enough Red Hand of Doom. It was honestly a blast. So all right, catch you later.